and get a chance to use the bowl again. So we are working our way through the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, and we finished last time the entire section that had to do with these karmic results, kind of giving us that formula of, if this is happening to you, it's because of your own actions of the past that are like a wheel of sharp weapons coming round to harm you. These are the particular actions, and this is what you need to do to reverse that. So it's very wonderful instruction to receive that helps us to generate greater conviction and karma, as well as to see once more how these twin demons, especially the mind of self-cherishing, is playing a role in creating these karmic patterns. Anytime we're creating negative karma, or maybe not necessarily any time, but I would say most of the time we're creating negative karma, it's with a mind of self-cherishing. It's a mind where we are only thinking about ourselves and our needs in the moment, and we are not so aware of the needs of others. We end up neglecting their needs and sometimes causing them harm, unfortunately. So again, this is the why we went through all of that. That was the section that took us through, I think, verse 48. We had a little segue into the next section, which began with verse 50. So let me go ahead and actually put on screen the little chart here. Let me put that up first. Again, 49 was kind of that recognition of the enemy of self-cherishing after having looked at cause and effect and, through karma and all of the antidotes, the things we have to do to oppose those sorts of results in our lives by behaving differently. And then in that sort of chartreuse color is the section we're in now, 50 through 90, requesting Yamantaka to remove self-cherishing and self-grasping. So although we've been mostly focusing on self-cherishing, and this is all within the section, as it says on the left side there, of conventional bodhicitta, which is the antidote to self-cherishing. We'll get to ultimate bodhicitta towards the end, which is the antidote to self-grasping. Nonetheless, when you've already seen in the first few verses of this section, because we went through verses 50 through 52 in the last class, that we're invoking Yamantaka to bring forward both of these powers, the power of ultimate bodhicitta as well as conventional bodhicitta, to be able to overcome the twin demons. And recall that, again, these do tend to arise together in most of the minds of ordinary beings. Unless we make an active, effort to confront and avert them and do something different, they are going to arise together very frequently. And that's because we always have that innate tendency to grasp at an inherently existent I, and even grasp everything around us to be existing that way. And then we act from that place of holding on to that I with a mind of self-cherishing. All right, so let's go ahead and go back into the text. I don't know that I need to go to the slides yet because we're going into this verse, verse 53, that Geshe Jampa Gyatso in his commentary also broke out into individual lines, just like he did for verse 52, because there is this kind of number of requests that we're making to Yamantaka. And recall that Yamantaka isn't this external being who's going to come in and save the day, wearing a cape and, kind of take you to the city of enlightenment. Yamantaka is your own internal mind that you want to develop, specifically, again, the minds of conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. Ultimate bodhicitta being the realization of emptiness directly within the mind of a bodhisattva, someone who has conventional bodhicitta. So the very first line of verse 53 is Hong, Hong, great meditational deity, produce magical emanations. So again, these are sort of making these very heartfelt requests to Yamantaka to do these various things. And again, to produce magical emanations means simply, to produce various apparitions, magical appearances, but it's not necessarily that we want those to happen in reality. We want just whatever it takes for Yamantaka to produce whatever is needed to overcome these two minds, to do it. By the way, the syllable Hong, many of you know this syllable. We usually use the three Om, Ah, Hong to represent the enlightened body, Om, enlightened speech, Ah, and enlightened mind, Hong. So it's really the kind of enlightened mind of the Buddha, the perfect wisdom of a Buddha that's being invoked here. But Hong is also the seed syllable of Yamantaka. So it's kind of invoking the essence of what Yamantaka is, that wisdom. So Geshe-Japa Gyatso in his commentary says, the way in which the conventional and ultimate minds of enlightenment, bodhicitta, are symbolized by saying Hong twice is as above. As we saw last week when we had the repetition in the previous verse where we were saying, doing these things twice. Whenever we have that repetition in 2 times, it's to signify both of those being brought to bear, both the conventional mind of bodhicitta as well as the ultimate mind of bodhicitta. And then Geshe-la says, we say, great meditational deity, Yamantaka, please subdue those very enemies by means of producing infinite kinds of magical emanations. Or again, as I said, whatever forces are needed. It's interesting, I think Thupten Chodron, she says in her commentary, that it means to produce those actions that we spoke of last week. Remember the 4 actions of pacifying, increasing, controlling, and wrathful actions. Again, whatever is needed, whatever will do the trick. So when we say magical emanations, again, we're not necessarily, requesting that these external things come into play, but rather that there be these movements of our own mind in particular directions to pacify our own delusions and craziness, to increase all of the positive qualities that we need to bring these things to bear, to control our own minds, to be even wrathful towards ourselves when we need to overcome these states of mind. So again, was there a question, Stella? Yeah, you need to unmute.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because I know that Yamantaka is a tantric deity,
Mm-hmm.
and so I thought that you needed to have like a permission to practice anything with him. Is this a separate thing, or?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't understand the difference. I mean, because it's basically, that's what I understand Yamantaka to be, the wrathful one who does whatever he needs to do to subdue those that need it,
Right.
including us.
Yeah.
How does this relate to the practice of Yamantaka?
Sure. And thanks for that question. And again, we talked earlier about how Yamantaka is brought into play here because there are some tantric elements to this text, but it is technically not a tantric text. It is still falling within the sutra, is a part of the Lojong, the mind training teachings.
Yeah.
So nonetheless, we do have, again, the power that we're trying to invoke in this tantric being who is a wrathful emanation of Manjushri, which again will supply us with some additional, force behind it. You don't have to have had any sort of tantric empowerment to study this text. Where empowerments or initiations really come into play is when you actually want to engage in formal tantric practice, which would be then to do the sadhana, which is normally translated as the means of accomplishment of Yamantaka or whatever deity that you're being initiated into, to be able to do the deity yoga that comes with that, which is to visualize yourself in the form of Yamantaka, which again is not happening in any of this part of the text. You are invoking that which is symbolic of your own internal ability to develop the 2 forms of bodhicitta, your conventional and ultimate bodhicitta. But it's not that you're visualizing yourself as Yamantaka.
All right.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, if you have had tantric empowerment, there'd be no problem in doing this in that form, because we are trying to uphold the pure view of ourselves as a deity, as a Buddha, as much as possible. But nonetheless, it's not a tantric text in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Sure, Stella. Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. So let's go on then to the next line where we're doing some more invoking of this power of Yamantaka. Za, bind that enemy under oath. So ja, or sometimes it's spelled DZA, but za or ja means summon. So summon. Again, twice as above. We are, doing that for both ultimate and conventional bodhicitta. We are essentially saying summon that enemy or enemies and then bind them tightly without letting them run wild. Again, anytime that enemy is mentioned singular here, we can think about both of these demons being brought forth, both the mind of self-grasping and the mind of self-cherishing. We want to bind them tightly, meaning making them incapable of doing what they would normally do. Of course, this is all the internal work that we need to do on the path, of course. So it's not, again, that we can expect that just by invoking the presence of Yamantaka that suddenly, these things are going to be bound, that we're not going to ever have to deal with them again. We have to cultivate Yamantaka in a sense within ourselves, which again, the Tantric path does in its own ways, but here even on the Sutra path, by cultivating the two opposing minds, the mind that cherishes others through conventional bodhicitta and the mind that removes the tendency to see things inherently existent through cultivating ultimate bodhicitta. Then we have the syllable, the syllable pe. Pe it's not pronounced fat. Whoops, went too far down. It's the H in most of the Tibetan transliterations is giving an aspiration to that. So it's like a pe. Pe. It's like if you had your hand in front of your mouth when you were saying it, you would feel the air coming out with that H sound right after the P. Pe means crush. So it's crush, crush. Great Lord of Death, please do the liberation right. So once more, we say pay twice for the same reason as we've been saying these double syllables. The great Lord of Death is the executioner of Yama, which is Yamantaka. Remember, Yama is the Lord of Death, and the executioner of death then is the great Lord of Death, or the Yamantaka, the one who overcomes death, kind of overcomes that conventional side of it, and of course overcomes all of the other afflictions and delusions and so on through cultivating the wisdom, realizing emptiness. So it says here, in this case, though, rather than Yama referring to death, or the Lord of Death, Yama is here referring to the Mara of self-cherishing. And once more, we could include the Mara of self-grasping. Both of these states of mind can be brought into the understanding of what we mean by the Mara, that is Yama, that is being destroyed by Yamantaka, the executioner of Yama. And then we are saying essentially, you who, due to being its executioner, are the great Lord of Death who is known as the executioner of Yama. Please, quickly, do the liberation right against this very enemy. So my teacher talked a little bit about, well, he didn't say very much. He just essentially says that this idea of a liberation rite, apparently this is some tantric ritual that is done. But I looked it up on the internet, and it does seem like there are some texts about this where it's sort of a very forceful way of dealing with these demonic spirits that do exist, according to Tibetan Buddhism at least. They are manifestations, again, of various negative energy that can appear in the world and can be tamed. And there is a ritual that one engages in order to do that. So I don't know much more about it beyond that, but I just thought I'd mention, that he says this is a particular tantric ritual that's sometimes called like the taming of the demons. I suppose it's comparable in a way to what Catholic exorcism is, in a sense, of some sort of ritual to expel those demonic forces. They do say that certain spirits do have, due to a karma that we have with them from having interacted with them negatively, the ability to cause what's called spirit harm. And I'm not trying to freak anybody out by saying this stuff. If you haven't created that type of karma, you'll go through your life without experiencing that type of a thing, of some sort of spirit harm. But in Tibetan Buddhism, this is very much something that they do embrace as a reality that does happen to certain people. And they have some form of a spirit harm, and there are certain rituals that can be done to cause that spirit to disconnect from the person that they are bothering, that they are, disturbing through the force of that malevolent connection that you had with them in a prior life. So again, it's not like we should be on the lookout for all these things happening to us. Rather, just try to be very mindful about doing what we can to not create negative karma that would ensue, something like that, cause something like that to happen. So let's go back to the text and look at the last line of this verse. Again, we get a bit more commentary with this on each line. This is the last line of, whoops, did it again. 53, 53D. Destroy, destroy. Please cut the knot of grasping. It's kind of interesting, actually. The Pema, or not Pema, Thupten Chodron, Venerable Thupten Chodron's translation that she's actually using Thupten Jinpa's translation of the text, and there the syllable that's put forward is shik, 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 and it's done twice as well. So I don't know why in ours they translated it as destroy rather than shik. I don't know. It kind of ruins the whole thing where you have hong, hong, za, za, pei, pei, shik, shik. I don't know. There's something about it when you have those different sounds. They're all meant to be kind of a bit forceful sounds. But the meaning of the two, whether it's shik, shik or destroy, destroy, is as before, that we want to bring to bear both of those minds that are the antidotes to these twin demons. Through taking the knot of grasping to be the knot of self-grasping and self-cherishing. So when we say, please cut the knot of grasping, we mean both self-grasping, which is the deeper root, the deeper error that we are dealing with, and we'll get into in the latter part of the text when we talk about cultivating ultimate bodhicitta, as well as self-cherishing, which is again, the twin demon that is the more manifest way that we get into trouble and are creating most of our difficulty and problems, is through putting ourselves first, holding ourselves as more important than others. So essentially what we're saying, as it says there, is please cut these two from the root. So once more, pretty forceful stuff. And that's because we're dealing with this yamantaka energy, this forceful energy. So let's go on then to the next verse, which is the last of this sort of introductory section before we get into, from verses 55 through 90, we're going to have a repetition thing going on again, like we had in the earlier verses around karma. So now we're beckoning once more. Come here, great meditational deity Yamantaka, this sack of actions and the 5 poisonous afflictions that mires us in the foul bog of the actions of psychic existence. Please, in this very moment, tear it up, tear it to shreds. So we have a tear it kind of being repeated there at the end of this, which we're going to see is also the same sort of alluding to the two forces that we want to bring to bear. So let's see what Geshe-la says about this, and I do have a couple of slides to share on this. Through again requesting the great meditational deity Yamantaka by saying, come here, we make an appeal to him. Why? Due to the abodes of psychic existence being completely filled with the foul bog of actions and afflictions, karma and delusions. It is a sack, kind of a container in which we are entirely held. And since the one that mires us in this foul bog is the self-cherishing, we request him to tear to shreds this sack of self-cherishing that is completely filled with bad actions, negative karma, and the 5 poisonous afflictions, which I'll show you a slide on those in a moment, what Geshe Jampa Gyatso defines those as. They're defined differently in some of the different texts. Then it says further, so that it is not torn up in stages, we request, please rip it up, tear it to shreds quickly in this very moment. Don't waste your time. Don't be like tearing up a letter that you didn't want to get or something where you tear it up bit by bit and then eventually throw all the little pieces in the trash can or something. Just have it entirely just ripped like you're putting it through a paper shredder or something. You want it all gone immediately. You don't want it to linger in any way. Once more, that's that kind of force of Yamantaka that we're bringing to bear. So there's these kinds of references here to this samsara being like a sack or foul bog that we are caught in, and that's all contained within a sack of karma and delusions. Karma and delusions, again, being the main cause of our suffering. So as I said, Geshe-la, he defines in his commentary, so I'll share those slides. I may have to go forward a few slides because I had set this up with slides that we again, we're in that section, which I pointed out earlier on the outline. We went through that verse, 53, now 54. Geshe-la says the 5 poisonous afflictions are attachment, hatred, ignorance. Sound familiar? These are the 3 root delusions. It's understandable that they would be included in the 5 poisonous afflictions. Jealousy and pride. Now, these are actually the way that the afflictions are often set out in tantric presentations, because these are the five that are counteracted by the five Dhyana Buddhas. The Dhyani Buddhas are the kind of Buddhas of a particular lineage that do have, that represent the purified aggregates, each of the one pertaining to a particular aggregate, and they also are the purification of the afflictions that they are corresponding to. And they're presented a little differently in some tantras. But the five delusions or five poisonous afflictions that are set out in many of the tantric presentations are these five: attachment, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, and pride. So then he goes on to say, just as if we ingest even a small bit of poison, it can endanger our life. Likewise, as long as we are filled with these afflictions, we cannot achieve liberation, and therefore they endanger our life of liberation. And of course, by liberation here, I think he's referring to the bigger liberation, complete liberation, which is enlightenment. Um, but even, to attain individual liberation, we have to remove these poisonous afflictions. We have to do them in once and for all, in the same way that we're invoking Yamantaka to do there, is just to annihilate it. But nonetheless, he goes on to say, whoops, I guess that was it. That was the only, I thought there was more that he was saying. So I don't know if I need to say much about these five delusions. I think most of us are quite familiar with attachment, that mind that is corresponding to something that is pleasant, that we are grabbing at as if it was even more pleasant than it appears, and we don't want to be separated from it. We want to have it continue to be in our lives. Hatred being the exact opposite response, because it's towards something that is unpleasant, that we exaggerate the unpleasantness of and want to push it out of our lives, not continue to experience it. Ignorance, the main root of ignorance, main ignorance, is that ignorance that is grasping at inherent existence, that is driving all of the delusions, though there are other forms of ignorance as well. Jealousy, which of course is a mind that is observing what others have with a mind that wishes to possess those and could even want to take those away from the person who possesses them. But it has a comparison of ourselves to others and a wish to acquire what others possess. And then pride, of course, which is an inflation of that sense of self that is the self that we are grasping at and elevating it to a much more superior status compared to others, so that we then become very full of ourselves. They often refer to it as a puffed up mind. So I think, again, we're mostly familiar with these, but again, going back to what Geshe-la was saying in terms of his commentary, is that these are one of the main things that are playing a role in terms of our experience of samsara, that we're in this sack of our karma and all of the delusions that drive our karma. Now, there are more than those five delusions or five afflictions. Um, in the traditional text that I'm teaching actually on Tuesday nights. Eloise was coming for a while, and then with her travel, she hasn't been able to join. But it's a text where you go through all of the various factors that are parts of the mind. And essentially, the root delusions are often defined as 6, and then there are secondary afflictions that go up to 20 of those. So that's 26 different delusions. But then there was even in the sutras of the Buddha, he talks about 84,000 afflictions, which is where I guess you get into different iterations of these and different flavors of these. Because even if when you talk about a mind of anger, you can see that it has a lot of different gradations to it, right? It starts off as just a simple aversion, annoyance. It can become irritation, can become a little stronger than that, where we're really having some deeper repulsion for what's going on. And then it can become anger, and then it becomes hatred. It could become rage if we go all the way to that degree. We have a lot of different gradations of every one of these. Even attachment, we might have a mild attachment to some things, but then a sort of addicted mind when it comes to other things in our lives. So just understand that these are one way of describing samsara and the situation that we're in. And it's not that, again, our goal is to be free of samsara. When it was talked about, again, at the end of being, these are what block us from liberation. It's not to say that liberation is our goal, but we have to attain liberation from our own afflictions if we're ever to attain enlightenment. what the process, this is what I'm teaching on Wednesday night. Mark's been coming to the teachings for Thupten Norberling, where we talk about the process that the Bodhisattva goes through of developing their mind all the way to Buddhahood. Kind of what is the technical way that one moves from one level to the next and continues to progress forward. And in that, we see that in order for the Bodhisattva to attain enlightenment, although their main obstacle is to remove these subtler obscurations in their mind, they absolutely have to remove the afflictions first, because the afflictions are what are disturbing our minds continually. And if we don't develop that sort of peace first, we can't get to the subtler obscurations that are in the mind. So anyway, I'm just pointing that out because we might see these terms like liberation that Geshe-la mentioned and wonder, well, why is that in there? Because the Bodhisattva isn't after their own liberation at all. And they're not even really after their own enlightenment. Their own enlightenment is a goal only insofar as it helps them to benefit others. But nonetheless, we do have to remove all of the afflictions before we can go forward all the way on our progress to enlightenment. So let's go to the next slide here, which essentially is giving a little bit of a introduction to these remaining quite a few verses, 36 verses or something that we're going to go through from 55 through 90 that are going to have the exact same format, except of course the first two lines will be different. The first two lines will show the distorted ways of thinking and behaving that are due to the twin demons. Kind of how are those manifesting in our lives? And then a refrain invoking Yamantaka to destroy them. This refrain that we actually saw back in verse 52, I think it was, where it said, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. Kind of kill both the self-grasping, which is the self, and the executioner, which is the self-cherishing. So again, I'm not going to go back through what I went through last week in reference to verse 52, but I did want to give a little introduction that comes from Venerable Thupten Chodron's book before we get into this section, because it might seem repetitive at times, but as she says, she finds these verses especially powerful because they show that although we want happiness, under the influence of afflictions and self-preoccupation or self-cherishing, we create the causes for the opposite. How like we keep invoking all these certain things that we do, that we've witnessed ourselves having done or that we could imagine ourselves doing. And then we want Yamantaka to, get rid of them. Why? Because again, we can see that they are antithetical to even our own happiness, our own well-being. Much less the well-being of others, which of course is the main goal that we, are wanting to abandon self-cherishing, is so that we can learn to cherish others fully. But nonetheless, this is how we are creating our own problems, similar in idea to what we saw in the earlier verses, those sets of verses that looked at how we are creating the wheel of sharp weapons that comes back to harm us. So it's a similar type of thing, but it's not quite as detailed in some ways. So then she says, clearly illustrating beyond a doubt how these two, again, self-grasping and self-cherishing, sabotage our welfare. These verses activate us to change. Note the heartfelt calling out to Yamantaka for guidance and inspiration in the last two lines. And as I was saying, I don't want to totally discount Yamantaka as being some sort of external force. Yamantaka could be comparable to our own gurus and the enlightened Buddhas who do play a role in our enlightenment without without question. But that's not the way that we position things in Buddhism, right? When I was growing up Catholic, there was this tendency to look at God as this omnipotent being who you could pray for, who would then grant your requests on the basis of your prayers to that being. And if God is your creator, it kind of makes sense in some way to invoke the being that created you to change your situation in some way, or to, help you with other things in your life or what have you. It makes sense within the context of a theistic position. But in Buddhism, where there is no theistic leaning at all, there is this force, which are the Buddhas, the enlightened minds of these beings who were just like us, who developed their minds to that degree, and we ourselves want to develop our mind to that degree. That force can play a role. It is a part of our path to enlightenment, without a doubt. We spoke about this previously when we touched on the one verse that had to do with the gurus and making sure, that we have the right relationship with our gurus and so on. And gurus are said to be the embodiment of Buddhas in our lives, the way Buddhas are manifesting in our lives. But there is this force. I don't want to totally discount, as I was saying, that there is something outside of ourselves that plays a role. It's just that when we are mainly invoking Yamantaka, it's to invoke the ability to awaken all of that within ourselves. As I often point out, and whenever I teach on the spiritual teacher, especially the module of Discovering Buddhism that's all about relating to a spiritual guide, that the only purpose of an outer guru is to awaken the inner guru. We do need the outer guru to help us on that path, but the main thing is you've got to get your inner guru woken up, which is your own inner wisdom that can be completely manifest and completely awakened to its potential. So this is the idea behind it. Now, Tipton Chodron, she's saying, we need that inspiration. What was the other word that she used besides inspiration? Guidance. I mean, these are two it's definitely factors that we can look to and try to keep that connection with these holy beings, with our gurus, so that they can appear and help us and be factors in getting us to enlightenment. But the main factor is going to be your own development of your mind. And so, again, that's why I'm just pointing that out in regard to this. I also want to share two slides that are some quotes from a little bit later in this section. Nonetheless, I thought it was good to share them now because it was about, she was kind of taking a pause in the middle and saying, oh, by the way, when you're working with these verses, here's some advice. So anyway, what she says is, just knowing these verses intellectually isn't sufficient. We need to apply them to our daily lives. In this way, our actions become genuine Dharma because it involves transforming our minds from an unwholesome to a wholesome state. So as we go through these, in each of these lines A and B that are the individual thing that we are trying to combat and recognize it to be problematic, that it is arising from the twin demons and we want it to be annihilated by Yamantaka, that this is, the way that we have to apply them is to kind of take heed of those actions, avoid those actions, do what we can to counter those things so we can stop them from appearing. That's what we're essentially doing. Again, all the work is still within our own minds. That's the workshop. But we have to use the advice that's coming out of this text by Dharma Rakshita to give us the clues of how we actually go about changing our situation, changing our minds to a more wholesome state. So then she says, by so clearly pointing out our faults, these teachings encourage us to exercise an introspective awareness, to notice these disturbing emotions and actions. Then, instead of justifying or rationalizing them, we can apply their antidotes and be free from them. This is the whole point of this part of the text, is to point out how we can see these patterns of self-grasping and self-cherishing manifesting in a variety of ways. And we want to invoke our own inner wisdom, as well as, again, the gurus, the Buddhas, to aid us on this path, but to overcome them, to annihilate the demon of self-cherishing and the demon of self-grasping. So let's go ahead and do this verse, and then we'll go to Geshe-la's commentary. And then I don't know that I'm going to have much to share on the slides. I really didn't have any additional passages for most of these, because I think Geshe-la's commentary will be sufficient for us to discuss them. But verse 55 begins this pattern of the first two lines setting out something that we have done or are doing or will do. And then the last two lines are going to be the refrain. Although we have spent our time suffering in the three bad migrations, we run toward its causes without being alarmed. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. So remember this rant and rave, that was a repetition thing that is technically not two different words as it is in English, but the idea is that we want to do that same thing of invoking Yamantaka, which is the essence of both of those antidotes of conventional bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, to, pummel the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, the dual conceptions. And then to get to the hearts of the enemy, remember we talked about that last week. By the hearts, we mean the vital point, what it is that we need to correct in order to overcome it. So for the first, the enemy, which is the self, that's referring to the self-grasping. What will be the heart of that we need to kind of strike? That would be the conception of the self as inherently existent, the conception of ourselves as inherently existent, that we want to, completely annihilate through overcoming its way of apprehending the I. And then the executioner, which is kind of the companion of the self-grasping, which is self-cherishing in this case. That executioner of self-cherishing, how do we get to the heart of that? By changing the way that we are, again, apprehending things. Instead of apprehending the self, the I, as being most important and others as not being as important, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to hold others as most important, ourselves as not as important. And then maraya literally means kill. It means, do away with. Yes, Mary Jo, you have a question? Maybe? You're going to need to unmute, Mary Jo. There you go. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to move. Anyway, no, I'm sorry.
I'll lower your hand. Okay.
Thank you. It's a mistake. Yeah.
All right. I wasn't sure. It came up and I was like, oh, I want to make sure I answer Mary Jo's question.
Thank you. Thank you very
I think
much.
I'm getting fuzzy again. My camera, when I toggle back and forth, sometimes gets fuzzy. I'm going to do the share screen to put on the the text, and then maybe I will, stop my video for a moment and put it back on. Okay, so we just read verse 54. Actually, we'll go back to the slides because there's a verse of Shantideva's that I want to point out that's kind of got a similar flavor to this. But what Geshe-la says in relation to, oh, I'm sorry, not 54, 55. So that's on the next page. Yeah, let me put that up a little bit. Okay, from the point of view of being involved in the activities of this life, until recently, we have spent our time only in suffering by being reborn in the abodes of the three bad migrations again and again. Remember, those are the realms of the hell beings, the hungry ghosts, and the animals. Even though this is so, still now, without being alarmed, that is, without being frightened, once again, we run solely to create the causes for suffering. In spite of having been in this cycle of creating causes for future suffering through all of our non-virtuous thoughts, deeds, words, nonetheless, we have that knowledge, but we keep doing the same thing again and again. We keep creating the causes for suffering in spite of even being aware of it. Now, most sentient beings aren't even aware of it, right? They don't know about karma and how they are creating the causes for their future suffering. Let me actually share that real quickly. That was the verse that I think is, again, the only extra slide that I have in here. It's verse 28 from the first chapter of Shantideva's text, sometimes called the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. But this is Ziggy To. She was a student in the master's program with me, and she translated this for the use in the basic program of the FPMT. This verse says, although wishing to be rid of misery, sentient beings run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness, like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. So this is the state that most beings are in, is that although they don't want to suffer, and is there anybody on the planet, whether it be a human or an animal, that wants to suffer, wants to have miserable situations? Well, no, but nonetheless, they end up running towards misery itself by creating negative karma, by creating non-virtue. And although they want to be happiness, once more, is there a being on this, in all of existence, that doesn't want to be happy? No, this is what's the starting point for all of the Buddha's teachings, that sentient beings have that fundamental wish to not suffer, to be happy. But nonetheless, even with that wish, they ignorantly destroy happiness, like an enemy of happiness. They act as their own enemy in this way, continuing to destroy all the causes that would lead to their own well-being. So now, do you have a question, Mary Jo? I see your hand up again. Yeah.
Yes, I have a comment. I have a comment.
Sure.
It might be a little inappropriate. I'm not sure, but I liked it. it was a quote by Ram Dass,
Uh-huh.
and it was suffering is our spiritual sandpaper. I kind of liked it. You know, it's kind of how we, you know, we smooth things out and get shape. And
Yeah.
I kind of liked it anyway.
Yeah, well, this certainly is in the Lojong, trainings, that idea that, we want to put suffering to use, in
Yeah.
all of these things that are about the various negative experiences that we have, that we can actually make them into something useful, to smooth ourselves over, to create more virtue rather than non-virtue. So, yeah. Did you have anything more on that, Mary Jo, or no? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and continue with the commentary that Geshe-la has with regard to verse 55. Let me pull that up. Then he goes on to say, who is the one who makes us run in this way? What are the forces that are causing us to do this? In spite of, not wanting to suffer, we continue to create the causes for it and just continue to have rebirth after rebirth, many of them in the lower realms, unfortunately. And it goes on to say, through seeing that it is self-cherishing, and again, we could include self-grasping in there. Don't think in terms of it necessarily having to be singular in this context, because we're invoking both forces of conventional bodhicitta to overcome self-cherishing, ultimate bodhicitta, excuse me, to overcome self-grasping. So through seeing that it is these twin demons that makes us run in this way, as before, we say, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. Kill these two conceptions, because they're just causing us more problems. So we can see, again, I'm not going to do this for every one of these verses, but we can see, if we do some extra analysis, how these two minds are playing a role in this. Well, first of all, the root of self-grasping is going to be there, because anytime we're creating any type of negative karma, we're doing it from the vantage point of clinging to inherent existence. That ignorance is always going to be present. We set up a sort of target by reifying this sense of self and then defending that self in the face of whatever it is experiencing. So we will continue to create the causes for suffering as long as we have that demon of self-grasping. Now, how is self-cherishing playing a role in this? Well, self-cherishing often, again, is accompanying it. It's causing us to do things that cause harm to others, that are part of the non-virtue that we're creating, that cause us to go into the abodes of the three bad migrations again and again. Without a doubt, so much of what we do, again, is flavored by that desire for happiness for ourselves alone, and we neglect the welfare of others. So as I said, in every one of these, you might have to do your own little investigation, but it's to see, well, how is my self-cherishing and self-grasping playing a role in that? And what do I need to do to abandon it? The basic advice on all of these is going to be the same. We'll cultivate the mind that cherishes others in the form of conventional bodhicitta, and the mind that sees the lack of an inherently existent self through ultimate bodhicitta, through the wisdom that realizes emptiness. But of course, we also have to take more intermediate steps to stop doing some of these things. Obviously, to stop engaging in the negative karma that's going to cause you to take an unfortunate rebirth and so on. So that's the idea behind these verses, is that they're to give us some additional stuff to work with that wasn't necessarily in the first part, that we looked at how all those karmas are creating certain results that we have to experience, and we can interpret what happened previously based on what we're experiencing currently. But here we're looking at kind of all these various activities that arise through the force of the minds of self-cherishing and self-grasping. So verse 56, let's just do this one, and then we'll take our middle of the class break. Our effort to accomplish our immediate wishes is small. We do not culminate in any of the many activities we do. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. So in the first two lines, the commentary is essentially saying that in the first line in particular, this immediate wish is a wish for something to happen very soon, such as when practicing the stages of the path to enlightenment, our Lam Rim teachings that we want to practice and meditate on, or doing an approximation retreat, which is a tantric retreat that is done on the basis of having done an initiation. This retreat gives you permission, if you complete that retreat, to do self-initiation and has other benefits from it in and of itself. But anyway, this approximation retreat that you might be doing, or any other activities. But then, on the basis of all of that, to desire clairvoyance, visions, and so forth, after not, more than 2 or 3 days have passed. And then when studying, even to think, well, may I soon be given a title based on my learning, and so forth. So this immediate wish is the idea that on the basis of having done something that is really quite minuscule, the effort we put into accomplishing something that we wish for isn't really so great. We still want the results. We want those realizations of the path to enlightenment. We want all these amazing powers that will appear, these cities, these realizations, accomplishments. We want, to be given a title on the basis of our learning, to, have people refer to us as in such high esteem and what have you. So this immediate wish, he says then, is posited in terms of our becoming worn out when mere months and years pass without a total effort to accomplish whatever it is we wish. So we expect the result, but we've already lost our energy for putting effort into the cause. So it's essentially, don't expect the results without having done the commensurate work in creating the cause, especially when it comes to our spiritual realizations. Then in terms of the second line, line B of that, in addition, many activities is to go to a hermitage, for instance, without having culminated any study whatsoever, and so forth. Also without culminating a retreat there, to do something else. So like we go off to do something, one of the many activities that we decide we'd like to do on our spiritual path, but we don't bring it to its conclusion. We're not steadfast in regard to finishing it. So he says there, having seen that the one that makes us act like this is also self-cherishing. As before, we say, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. So once more, to go back to the two lines and just review it on the basis of what Geshe-la explained, when our effort to accomplish whatever it is that we're wishing for in terms of our spiritual path is so small, so we aren't even creating the causes, and we're already exhausted and not really wanting to do much more. And we think, well, why haven't I gotten the results yet? Some people even have this when they come to the Buddhist path and they think that the results are going to be there right around the corner. Well, results take a lot of time. We've been dealing with the delusion since beginningless time. It's not going to take beginningless time to get out of here, but it's certainly going to take a lot more effort than just a few meditation sessions, or, reading a few books or what have you. And then the second part is, again, we don't culminate the activities that we do in our spiritual path. We take, oh, that looks interesting. Well, I'd like to, finish my Nundro of my Vajrasattva recitations, and we start it. And then before we know it, we're tired of doing it. And we're like, oh, I think I'd rather do mandala offerings, or I'd rather read more, or I'd rather do whatever. And we keep like going, like a bee from one flower to the next, but we don't put the full effort into extracting the essence of any one of these things that we do. We see this in worldly efforts as well. This often happens with people, right? Maybe some of you are that way. Maybe some of you know people who are that way. But to, acknowledge that if people don't see things through to their conclusion, you end up with a bunch of half-done stuff. I always joke, because I'm probably one of the worst at this, of buying a lot of Dharma books that I've pretty much only read the introduction to. You have your little bookmark at the introduction of almost every one of them. And part of it is because, I just simply haven't had the time to read them. It's good intention, but I don't think it's a really healthy way to go about doing things in some ways. If we read the introduction and we want to read the book, well, then finish the book and then go on and read, the next one or what have you. But yeah, in terms of our Dharma activities, it is good to bring things to culmination. You create a pattern. In fact, it's talked about in the explanation of the perfection of joyous effort, that this is actually one of the powers. It's called steadfastness, where you want to continue to bring things through to conclusion. Otherwise, you create a very harmful pattern of like not completing things. And then that will carry over into future lives. So again, what is causing all of this? Once more, you can think about how self-cherishing is obviously playing a role, because it's that mind that, you know, wants things to be happy and fun and wonderful for ourselves. And that might be why we keep going from one thing to another, rather than just seeing things through to the end, as difficult as some things might be. And particularly with things like the Mundro, you know, where you're doing 100,000 prostrations and 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras and so on, and all these things that can be at times a little bit monotonous if we don't have the right frame of mind with them. Well, it is challenging to do some of those things, but we tend to shy away from those things that we don't want to do and move towards those things we do want to do. And sometimes that's a moving target. We end up, you know, going from one thing to another. So as we go through this again, I'm not going to spend quite as much time explaining each one of them in terms of how you apply it to your own situation and seeing how self-cherishing is playing a role, but then underneath that, self-grasping is also playing a role in terms of the self that is at the core of all of this movement around and doing all these things. So I hope it's clear. Let's take a little break. I have almost, well, 7:04, let's call it 7:05, so 7:15. So okay, good. So just as we were having the break, Mary Jo wanted to ask a question. So Mary Jo, are you there, and can you unmute yourself? And
Yes,
yeah, great.
thank you. Yes. And I apologize because this is indirectly only related, but you know, I've been enjoying and appreciating some of the images, the Vajrasattva and the Medicine Buddha, and some of those things. You know, FPMT has wonderful resources, and other people also, I think, do. Um, and I don't, am I still on?
We're hearing you. Your
Okay,
camera's
because
off, but that's
I'm
okay.
on to, I don't know what happened. I'm somewhere else now.
That's
Anyway,
okay.
um, I believe the lady at FPMT told me that John Landau has a book that has some explanations. What I was looking for was more explanations about, you know, all those things about, you know, the moon disk and the sun and the moon and the Vajra, and everything seems to have really a meaning. It's nothing is just put there for decoration. And I would like to know what some resources are. I know there's that big book that's kind of quite expensive. I didn't want to spend that much money on a big book, $60 or something, but can you recommend some books that would tell about some of the, at least the more common images that we see around the Tonkas that are made like that and such?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the book that you mentioned that someone had alluded to was Images of Enlightenment by John Landau, and Andy Weber was the illustrator. In that book, Images of Enlightenment, he does go into some of the detail of some of the things, but he doesn't go into it for every Buddha, but it's about the various Buddha images that are used in Tibetan Buddhist practice in particular. So there are sections on the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, again, that I mentioned earlier, that have a strong reference within Tantra and what have you. There are sections where they deal with Bodhisattva images that
Okay.
are Buddhas like appearing as, you know, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha compassion, Manjushri, Vajrapani, these various beings. And then, of course, a lot of the highest yoga Tantra deities. Green Tara, of course, is in there. Yamantaka's in there. All of these various. So they're kind of nice because they're not that many pages per Buddha, but there's enough to
Mhm.
give you a flavor and a feeling of what that Buddha is about. But like if you were to study Yamantaka, for example, Yamantaka's holding all these various implements, a lot of kind of wrathful weaponry and what have you. And to really
Mhm.
study it at that level, you'd have to go into the sadhana, the meditation on that, which again, you would need to have tantric initiation for. So it doesn't seem that there's a book that kind of has a description of all the various implements and what they mean. But there should be some of the basic ones, the core ones would be in there as they talk about, for example, Vajrasattva in his solo form, he's holding the Vajra and bell. And of course, what those signify would be definitely included in John Landau's explanation. So you'll get a feeling for it in terms of what is set out on the various Buddhas as to what these various implements or things might mean, as well as, of course, what those Buddhas are about. So again, John Landau, Images of
Mhm.
Enlightenment.
Mhm.
It still is a little bit pricey, I think. You can probably find it used though at like Amazon or a Libri or any of those sorts of websites, Powell bookstores, whatever. They often
Mhm.
have used copies that you can get that are sufficient to go through and get an understanding. Okay.
What was that? Thank you. And what was that big book that you said you had that
Oh,
called
that
the?
was about symbols of Buddhist symbols, and it kind of
Oh,
goes
okay.
into again the eight auspicious symbols and the
Uh-huh.
eight auspicious substances, and it does talk about a lot of the symbols. There is a condensed version of that too, I think, but I'd have to look that up offline. So,
Uh-huh.
um, but anyway.
Yeah,
If
thank
somebody
you.
wants to do that and put that in the chat box, you'd be welcome to do that. But I'm not telling you not to listen to the teaching, but nonetheless, if you are aware of that, again, Robert Beer is the artist that put that book together, the larger book of the Encyclopedia of Tibetan Buddhist Symbols. But I'm pretty sure there's an abbreviated version of that that's a lot less expensive. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you very much. And I know you gave that information before. Thank
That's all
you.
right. That's all right, Mary Jo. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stella, did you want to say something?
Well, I just want to ask a question, and it really doesn't have anything to do with our teaching tonight, but I've been, since I don't have the calendar, the liberation calendar,
Mhm.
I'm really having a hard time figuring out the SOG days.
Uh-huh.
Do you know how I can access them, or is
Mhm.
there a Tibetan calendar, do you think, online?
Well, you can get the Liberation Calendar. I think you can order it now from the office in North Carolina. They will send them if you contact them through the LPP
Oh,
email address. Uh, I did receive mine as a volunteer for LPP. I get one every year, but so I know that they have them, that they're there. You can also, of course, get the PDF of it that you can use and access, and that you can order from them as well, or give them a donation for that. And
okay.
then you'll have that. If you're just looking at soak dates, though, I do know that the center up in Wisconsin, Deer Park, has on their website, usually they have every year a single PDF sheet that you can access to that has all the soak dates for that
Oh, great.
Tibetan year. So if that's all you need for the moment, you can go there. And if you have problems, then contact me and I'll make sure that you get to the right place. Okay.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Yeah. Mary Jo, do you have your hand up again? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Uh-huh.
I was just today visited the FPMT store, and
Mhm.
they have, if I was understanding it right, they have a PDF version of that liberation
Oh, okay.
calendar.
Yeah, you can get it there then too. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you can go to the foundation store and because they have only digital stuff now. I think they're pretty much done with all of the physical material things, but you can order it from there too, and then they download it to your computer and you can
Don,
access all the dates.
were you talking about Deer Park?
Yes,
Deer Park?
Deer Park in
Okay,
it's in Wisconsin.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if I just put in Deer Park, Wisconsin, I should
Yeah.
be able to find it, right?
Yeah, but if you get to their website and you can't locate where it is, let me know
Okay.
and I'll
All
find it
right.
for you.
Thank
Okay.
you so much.
Yes, Mark,
Sorry.
you have a question.
On the FPMT website, they have the Dharma practice dates. The whole calendar's there just on the website. If
Yeah.
I mean, I go to that once in a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, I think it's on the front page that you can access to that day's date, and it'll take you to a calendar thing. But I think it only gives 3 months: the prior month, the current month, and the next month. So you can keep track of it that way. But if you want something beyond that, then you will have to maybe get the calendar. Okay. So shall we head back to the text? Any questions on the text or anything we're studying? Yeah, Stella, you're going to have to unmute. So
Okay, I have
yeah.
another question about that. Do you suggest, like this really seems like a practice that you could do.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, because it's not like if you read it just as a book, I could see that it would be really hard to keep it, you know.
Hmm.
But if you do a practice, except it's pretty lengthy, but still,
Sure.
what do you think?
I mean, I think the Wheel of Sharp Weapons is intended to give certainly practice advice about how we go
Mhm.
forward, trying to implement this movement away from all of the actions that are bound up in our self-cherishing and self-grasping towards those that are driven by compassion, concern for others, as well as by the wisdom of emptiness. But yeah, I mean, I think it could be done. I mean, way back at the very beginning, remember that the teacher that I first received teachings on this from, whose name I can't remember at the moment, but anyway, he said, you know, as you go through this, think about these verses and apply them to yourselves. I mean, make them
Mhm.
into an exercise of looking at, well, how is this happening for me, or how am I doing things that are similar, and then put the impetus into changing those things. Now, obviously, again, it's a ton of verses to go through, and even in the time that we're spending going through, it's hard to apply the practice in a way that you could make it very heartfelt and genuine. But if you see any one of these verses or a few of these verses that you're going, oh wow, I didn't see that so much, that that's a pattern of self-cherishing and self-grasping, well then I need to maybe start to work on that and see what would I be doing different. Because if we talk about any of these things, just like the verses we just went into, anytime that we engage in anything that simply is blocking our movement forward, you know, spiritually, well, that's blocking our ability to benefit others. And in that way, we can say it's a product of our own self-cherishing, you know, of our own desire to not move as quickly to the state of enlightenment so that we can benefit others. We can see how self-cherishing plays sometimes stronger roles, sometimes subtler roles in terms of keeping us in these patterns that are not so useful.
You
So,
know, and I noticed that, I think you mentioned this though, that the refrain is different on different versions.
mm-hmm.
Like on the one that I have, it says, trample him, dance on his head of this treacherous concept of selfish concern, tear out the heart of this self-centered butcher who slaughters our chance to gain final release.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the refrain.
yeah,
I love that one, you know, but the way you do it is,
yeah.
it's good too, you know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the one that is that in that more poetic version that's even filled in with some level of commentary that's from
Right.
I think John Landau and Alex Berzin and somebody else. I think John Landau was involved in that. There were
Yeah,
several
it
people,
is both of them. Alex Berzin and Jonathan Landau are both the,
as well as yeah, Geshe Awandargye,
yeah,
Sharpa Toku,
uh-huh.
Kamlung Toku. I mean, that's one of the values of that. And again, there is, I think I did put the link for the actual verses. They don't have the full commentary on Alex's website, but the
Oh,
verses that he and those others translated can be found in the link on the reading list that I was distributed way back at the beginning of the course.
well, I have the commentary here at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
end of
yeah, yeah.
that's the same one you have,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
But what I was saying is that if you don't have the book, then at least you can look at the verses. And the
Oh, right.
verses are nice, the way that they do the verse translations. So, Laura, did you have your hand up then too?
I do. Yes. I was wondering when you were talking about going from one thing to another as being part of self cherishing, like not
Mm-hmm,
having steadfastness in
mm-hmm,
choosing or not being able to choose one thing where you're just going from one thing to the next, scattered type of array of
uh-huh,
behavior,
uh-huh.
then how is that in a way related? I mean, I think I sort of understand it, how it's related to self cherishing.
I mean, in my estimation, what happens is if our mind isn't so diligent in sticking with something, even though we might find it difficult at times, challenging, maybe even dry at times, well, then we're doing that out of self-cherishing, out of not, there is that side of our minds that is a portion of our self-cherishing that wants to have things that make us happy, that make us kind of have more pleasant experiences. Now, again, I'm not saying it's equivalent to this fundamental desire for happiness. It's a desire for happiness that is tainted by self-cherishing. Because why are we doing our practices? And let's use the example of somebody who says, like I did in the example, somebody who says, I'm gonna do my 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras. And so, they start off and they're doing their, recitations. And maybe it's kind of interesting for a little while because it's something different, something new, and you're kind of, and then after a while, it starts to become a little dry, and you're like reciting these mantras and you're going, oh my God, this is just going to go on forever. I'm never going to get to 100,000. And then you go off to do something else. You say, well, I'm not into that anymore. I got to leave that behind and I'm going to go on to do something else. I'm going to start reciting the Heart Sutra or doing whatever. I don't know. Well, why are you doing that? You're doing that because you yourself are driven by your own self-cherishing of wanting to have a pleasant, fun time doing your practice. And you're not willing to invest in what it would take to actually accomplish that practice so that you could then do the purification that is involved in doing your 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras. And therefore, that becomes a block to your moving forward towards enlightenment, right? Because you're not engaging in something that's actually going to become a stepping stone to move you on the path. You're just going to put your energy elsewhere then. So I see it very much as a product of self-cherishing, not in a gross way, but certainly in a subtle way.
Understand.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And yes.
One way I have dealt with that myself is that when you make a vow to do it, somehow that keeps you there. It might be really hard sometimes, it might be boring sometimes, but sometimes it's not at all boring. But if you've made that vow, then you sort of keep yourself to it, so I don't know if that helps or not.
No, that's very helpful. Actually, in a lot of these longer treatises that were composed by Indian masters on the Buddha's teachings, they do that at the very beginning. They make a promise to compose it, and it like becomes a force through which they see it through to the end. And I think there is something about that initial thing that we set up for when we're going to do something. When we've checked it out, we go, okay, I have the time, the energy, I can see this fitting into my schedule and I'm going to do it. Then you make the commitment to doing it.
Right.
And of course, if some major obstacle comes along, then you have to deal with that reality, but you still will, have the force to kind of get back into it and see it through to the end. So, okay. Yeah. Mary Jo, you had another question. Thanks, Stella.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess really just another comment that sometimes it feels to me like and I'm not criticizing but it's going to sound like a criticism, but I don't mean it in that way. But the way that we learn about this practice, and then we learn about another practice, and then we learn this matram, and then we learn another matram, and sometimes even that feels, I don't know, I don't quite, it seems like it is jumping around in some ways. And so it's not been a big obstacle because I find I'm attracted usually to one more than another or something. And it's probably my simple mind, but it does seem like instead of like in some traditions, they would use one matram and really stick with that and get it deep, 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 ingrained. And I guess that's up to every person if they want to do it that way. But I mean, I could stick with the little book about the steps of the Bodhisattva. Man, that could be my practice for the rest of my life. I know that.
And I see your point, Mary Jo, and I do agree that there are a lot of times where it seems like the table is overflowing with things of, this and that and all the various stuff. I guess once more we have to kind of cull it down to what are the essential qualities that we're really talking about in any of these particular things. And I think this text actually does it really quite well in terms of conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. We really have those two aspects of the path that we often refer to as the two wings of the bird, right? You have your wing of wisdom that we absolutely need to have if we're going to, progress. We have to have that realization of emptiness. But then we have the wing of that compassionate method that is so essential as well, that keeps us on track and moving towards bodhicitta. So as long as we don't lose sight of kind of the overall structure of where all of this is located, and then each of us individually do have to make choices about what we're going to spend our time on. So when we are studying, some of you might be with all of the various offerings, you're going to like 4 or 5 classes a week. Well, you might have to make some decisions about what it is that you're really going to invest in terms of going deeper, generating a greater understanding of, rather than only skimming the surface of 4 different topics and not being able to go much deeper than that. And maybe for your first time of getting exposed to those things, it's okay just to have it be somewhat superficial. But, I think we all have that challenge of like, how do we determine within that all the vast array of all these practices and mantras and, all these things that we get exposed to? What do we focus on? What is our heart practice? What is it that we really need to do? So I don't have an answer for you. If you have a guru who you can go to, like, many people go to Lama Zopa Rinpoche and say, what's my heart practice, or what's my yidam, which means your meditational deity, so that, if you have confidence that he's got greater insight into this than what you possess, then you can find out from somebody like that. But otherwise, most of us are kind of on our own to say, well, what is it that we really feel we need to work on? But hopefully we know our own minds a little bit by now, and we can say, well, I need to really counteract my anger, or I really need to enhance my understanding of emptiness, or whatever. We have some idea of where we need to put our energy and attention. But yeah. Does that help a little, Mary Jo? Or?
Yes, it does help. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Yep.
All right,
Thanks.
good. Okay, let's get back into the text and do some additional verses for tonight. So again, I'm not going to go back and forth between the slides and the commentary because I don't really have any additional stuff to share in terms of slides. So let's go on to verse 57. Let me push this up a little bit. There we go. We have great desire for pleasure, yet do not accumulate the collection of its causes. We have little tolerance for suffering, yet our longing, desire, and covetousness are great. And then again, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. So we have this little kind of pair here that's kind of interesting. We have this strong desire for pleasure, but do we really create the causes for it? Are we really invested in creating happy results for our future existence, all the way to the greatest happiness of enlightenment? And we have little tolerance for suffering, but yet we go to the places of creating causes for suffering quite frequently. In this way, this one's a little bit similar to the previous verse, but let's look at what Geshe-la says on this. Geshe Jampa Gyatso, he says first, most of us, as well as those among us who are, for instance, tulkus are the reincarnated lamas, and children of the nobility, have a great desire for pleasure due to having been immersed in pleasure from an early age. In fact, Geshe Jampa Gyatso in his oral commentary on this talks about these tulkus who are born into very privileged roles. Then if you are identified as a reincarnated lama, well, then you're treated like gold from the moment that you're born, and might develop some strong adherence to that pleasure, attachment to that pleasure. So it says then, as the cause for that pleasure, it is necessary to accumulate the collections by means of the 6 perfections. As is said, due to generosity, you have enjoyments. Due to having good morality, you have the happiness of good rebirths. Due to patience, you have a good appearance, and so on. All the various things that are taught about the 6 perfections, they are the means to have those good situations in one's life, where one is taken care of, has, retinue to attend to you, has all of the resources that you need and to benefit others. And he says, yet, the tail end of that paragraph, we do not accumulate them. So we really want all these pleasant results, and we don't have to be tulkus or no children of the nobility. Just being born in the West, I think, is evidence that we have it, probably most of us, pretty good in terms of the pleasant experiences we have. We cling to those and really want those to continue, but are we putting the energy into practicing virtue and creating the causes for them to continue? Are we engaging in generosity, good morality, patience, joyous effort, and so on, all the various practices of the Bodhisattva? Then in the second line, we have that idea that we have little tolerance for suffering, which he says is that whatever studies and so forth we do, whenever a slight difficulty arises, completely lacking in tolerance for suffering, we put it off until later. When things get hard, we stop. We don't want to do anything. We have to be willing to see that through, to not be stopped by our little tolerance for difficulty or suffering. Great longing desire is that even though we, who are presently known for the desire that craves the desirable and so forth, strive out of strong longing for the happiness, wealth, and so forth of this life in the desire realm, we do not accomplish them. Again, we get caught up in all of these things, but we don't really create any sort of, lasting effort that's going to result in some freedom from that suffering, some greater happiness that we could experience. So then he says, great covetousness. Remember, this is all with that line. Let me pull it back up here. The line, we have little tolerance for suffering, yet our longing, desire, and covetousness are great. So we aren't willing to put kind of the effort into seeing things through when it's difficult and challenging. And we, have this longing, desire, and covetousness that are great, that cause us to just keep engaging in all of these things once more without really creating any sort of major accomplishment with regard to it. We just get lost in samsara, in all the pleasures of the desire realm. So great covetousness, he says, is to be, for example, the covetousness in those geshes, lamas, and abbots, for instance, who, whatever studies and so forth they do, are unable to listen and reflect due to lacking tolerance for suffering, that thinks from their innermost heart, if only such listening and reflection would come to be. They would love for these things to come, but they aren't willing to put the effort into it due to their, they have, again, a lack of tolerance with regard to having to go through the difficulties of study and so on. So in the case of lay people, it is said to be covetousness in those who are unable to accomplish whatever they do, that thinks if only it would come to be regarding very high status, such as that of a government minister. I don't know if that's such high status, but anyway, the idea of being in a more prominent, powerful, well-off role or whatever. The whole idea is, again, that we have this idea that we'd like those things to come about, but we don't have the tolerance for engaging in the actions that will actually help them to occur. So, therefore, having seen that the one who makes us engage in doing this is also our self-cherishing, as above we say, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. So again, let's go back to the verse, and I'll just talk a little bit about it in the light of the commentary. So this great desire for pleasure that we don't create the causes for, and then even when it comes to creating some sort of more lasting effects, we have little tolerance for the difficulties and suffering that we might have to experience in acquiring that. Yet we have a longing desire and a covetousness to have those things accomplished. It's kind of the whole idea of like wanting results, but not being willing to put the effort into creating the results. This is impossible. The Buddha says that there is nothing whatsoever that is conditioned that doesn't arise on the basis of its causes. So therefore, we have to put effort into the causes if we are ever going to experience the results. All right. Let me go through a few more verses, and then we'll see if there are any questions or comments. Verse 58. Our new friendships are great, yet our concern for propriety is short-lasting. So the idea here is that although we can make these new friendships, especially the friendships with gurus, with beings who we think will be our spiritual friends, we aren't so loyal to them. We're not really, don't have a proper conformity to what will allow that relationship to continue. And so that's short lasting. So we end up dismissing those people, going on to other people. We're not really loyal, steadfast, true friends when it comes to Dharma relationships or even our other relationships in the world. But it's mostly from the point of view of Dharma friendships with a guru and so forth. Then the second line, our obsessive hunger is strong, yet we steal, rob, and zealously go in search of more. That we have this desire for things that is causing us to engage in misbehavior, obtaining things through ways that are not so in line with getting those things. Again, if we look at all of the stuff that we do have that satisfies our hunger to some degree, that came about through the opposite actions, actions of generosity rather than stealing, robbing, and having this covetous mind, again, that zealously is constantly looking for more. So let's skip over the refrain and go right to the commentary. Geshe-la says, to not even initially take the time to merely investigate and analyze someone such as a lama, friend, and so forth, and to then request that lama for the Dharma, to form a friendship with them and so forth, is to consider new friendships to be great. That we just kind of once more are really fleeting in how we go about things, and we move to, oh, this lama's coming to town. I mean, maybe this isn't as common nowadays as it was in the early days when I was practicing in 1990s in San Francisco, where there would be like a new lama coming through town every week, it seemed, and people like just go flitting from one to the other and form some sort of a relationship with that being. But then it disappears. Why? Because our concern for propriety is short lasting, which means that after a short while, we begin to disparage them, not even look at them or think about them. If we make some sort of a guru-disciple relationship in particular, we have to be very much honoring that. And not that, again, we have to make them into the sole person that we go to for all of our Dharma advice, but nonetheless, don't let yourself get into this pattern of just accumulating lamas, in a sense, where you just have all these beings you've made some very fleeting connection with, but you weren't really loyal. You didn't really do what was necessary to sustain that relationship. And we can see again that that's very similar to what we talked about in terms of our moving from one practice to another. It's how self-cherishing sometimes manifests, is that we always think there's something better over the next hill. Maybe that next lama that I meet will be the one that really charges my heart and makes me, totally committed to the Dharma. Well, in the meantime, we're not creating a very good pattern there that could end up resulting in actually the opposite of us being blocked by being benefited by these beings because of our fickleness in our friendships. The second line, obsessive hunger is a strong obsession that is a very strong desire for clothing, wealth, and the like. The cause of this is stealing and robbing others' wealth without making offerings to the three jewels, without being generous and so forth. And zealously, he says here, going to India and China in search of wealth, or wherever, where we're always kind of like looking for new ways of obtaining wealth and what have you. So we're going to have, what's manifesting is this obsessive hunger, this obsession to get what we want. And it's driven about in part, as Geshe-la is saying, by our having not engaged in the proper ways to acquire things, and to not engage certainly in the actions that would result in us having things to satisfy us in our lives, which are primarily generosity. Instead, we have, abandoned making offerings to the three jewels. We've not been generous with other sentient beings and so on. And we only become preoccupied with our own wealth. Well, it's very clear there how the mind of self-cherishing and self-grasping are operating there. So whose fault is it that we act like this? Having seen that it's the fault of our self-cherishing, we once more make that refrain. And then at the end, consequently, through viewing self-cherishing to be the root of all faults and cherishing others to be the root of all qualities, we should take this as our heart practice. Stop becoming obsessed with our own desire for all these things and going about acquiring them by stepping on everyone else's toes and what have you, and really think of others. Even if we have very little, we should at least try to imagine giving it to others if we can. Verse 59, we are skilled in flattery and solicitation. Solicitation is sometimes called hinting. I'm going to talk about these 5 wrong ways of obtaining material things, of having a living, wrong livelihood. So we often are skilled in these as well as flattery, hinting, as well as others. Yet our greedy disposition is strong. Yet we just keep feeding this desire for more again. I have similar themes here in some of these. Although we zealously amass and accumulate all sorts of material things and what have you, we're bound by miserliness. We can't break out of that mind that it gets attached to those things and doesn't want to give them away. So these two very much kind of go together around our possessions and the things that we use for our well-being that we can go out of control with sometimes, and perhaps not develop the right ways of acquiring them, nor even the right ways of using them once we have them. Rather, they become the source of our own miserliness. So as explained in the Vinaya, he says, there are 5 wrong means of livelihood. These are actually taught too in the Lam Rim. Sometimes you will see them in the section on making offerings, where we talk about that as one of the preliminary practices. And they are the ideas is that you want to make offerings that are acquired through right livelihood, not offerings that you've gotten through any of these 5 methods. So the first one that's often talked about is flattery, which is essentially where we are saying good things to somebody about them, trying to give them all of this, good feeling so that they treat us well, to kind of, as it says there, fabricate beauty, make things delicious and delightful about them that they see in themselves, that they then think good of you and give you something. This is one way that people do acquire resources, is by flattering all the people around them so that they take care of them. Solicitation or hinting is, even though one does not directly beg someone for their wealth and so forth, one explains how having done such and such a right for others was beneficial, how due to having explained this and that dharma, for instance, such and such an offering arose, and so on. In other words, one skillfully begs for something, hoping to be revered and so forth by others. So the one that's often set out as an example is like if you said to somebody who was, maybe you have a really rich relative, and you write to them and you say, oh, Christmas is coming up, and I that reminds me, that gift you gave me last year, that money that you sent me, it was so useful, and it would be just so amazing, you don't have to say, come right out and ask it, but you hint that it would be really nice to receive it again. It's nice if your rich uncle or aunt or whatever takes out their checkbook and sends you another check. Hinting might be totally accepted in society as just what people do, but it's not a good way to receive your resources, because it's manipulative, right? It's causing the person to have this impression of you of being so grateful for something that you haven't even already received. You've received it in the past, but you're already saying how grateful you would be to get it again, in a sense. So it's really quite, again, a dishonest way of going about obtaining your resources. Then it says wrong means of livelihood are illustrated by these two, flattery and solicitation. But we are also skilled in the others, such as expropriation, which we often call coercion, getting things through force. Certainly this is not a good way to get to your resources either, to take them from others, to force them into doing that. I think Venerable Thupten Chodron used the example of if you're even raising money for a Dharma center and you say to somebody, well, everyone else at the center has given $100, so you're kind of like putting them in a position where they feel they have to give $100 because everyone else did. That's even a subtle form of coercion. It's not, demanding that they do it, but it's really putting them on the spot. This one that's called calculated generosity. This is often referred to as kind of seeking reward for favor. It's a form of bribery where you're acquiring something greater by giving something smaller. So you might, again, have somebody like that rich uncle who sends money every year. And so maybe you think, oh, Christmas is coming up. I better send them something nice so that they think of me this year and send me that wonderful check. And so you send them something that's quite meager, but it's the way of casting out the line so that you can pull in the fish, and actually get something from them. The last one that's mentioned on here that isn't part of the Geshe-la's commentary is hypocrisy. It's the first of the 5 that are in the footnote there at the bottom. Hypocrisy, of course, is where we have, sometimes it's called pretension. And the idea is that we put on airs. And this can happen in Dharma situations, right? Where somebody might know that you're a Dharma practitioner, and maybe you've even, abandoned parts of your working life to be able to practice more, to meditate more, study more. And of course, monks and nuns who dedicate their lives to the Dharma do that frequently. They stop their householder life of working at a job, doing all that sort of thing, and they're dependent upon benefactors. Well, if you end up kind of giving airs that you're such a great practitioner and you're using so much of your time for all of these wonderful things, but you're really not, then it's hypocritical. You're going to get your resources by giving an impression to people that is false. One example of this is Geshe Ben Kongyo. There's only a handful of stories I've heard about him, but he sounded like just such an amazing practitioner of the Kadampa lineage that practiced these Lojong techniques. The story is that his benefactor was going to be coming to visit him on one day. And so he decided, oh, I need to really clean up my cave, where he was meditating. He had his altar that a lot of dust had accumulated. He cleaned everything up. He took everything down, made sure it was all really, really beautiful. And then when he finished, he goes, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm doing this to impress my benefactor, to have them benefact me, to continue to give me money. And so he took dirt from the bottom of his cave and threw it all up all over the altar. And there was apparently some lama in Lhasa or something who had some clairvoyance and said, Geshe Ben Kongyo has made the best offering today, because he actually threw all this dirt all over his altar to show what he was really like. Geshe Ben Kongyo, if you don't know, he was a thief in his prior life. And so there's all these stories about how he really struggled with his own self-cherishing that drove him to be a thief and steal things from people and what have you. So anyway, this was his realization that he was in effect stealing from this man by having the benefactor come there and be impressed, thinking, oh, what a great practitioner this guy is. I'm going to continue giving him money. So anyway, those are the 5 that are mentioned here traditionally. Let me just finish off this verse, and then we will see what questions people have. So that's on the next page. A greedy disposition is said to be the arisal of a deep-seated hunger that from our innermost heart thinks, since I do not have more than just this tea, butter, and so on, may I receive more. So that's the greedy disposition that comes together with those sort of wrong ways of livelihood. In addition, whenever we obtain things and so forth, we immediately put them in a room, a box, or the like, and then lock them up and entrust them to others and so on. Kind of get them wherever they're going to be safe and secure so that we don't lose them, so that we don't even use them to benefit others. This being what was mentioned in the second line, to zealously amass and accumulate. Although we have the tiniest bit of wealth, due to being bound by miserliness, we are unable to offer even the slightest to the 3 jewels, to give it to the destitute and so forth. Ideally, if we have complete conviction in karma, we should give away everything we receive. Now, I know it's hard to do that. I'm not telling you to do that. But one lot teacher I had said that if we had absolute conviction in karma, the karma of generosity, we would do it without hesitation. So the rest of it is kind of the same. Why do we act like this? Because of the self-cherishing and self-grasping. So we ask Yamantaka to rant and rave on the head of those conceptions, to get to their heart, to remove the way that they are apprehending things in terms of self-cherishing. Again, apprehending the self is most important. Self-grasping, apprehending the self as inherently existent. So I think that's probably all we're going to have time for tonight. Mary Jo, you've got another question, another hand up? You need to unmute. Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay.
That word toku, toka,
Toku.
toku is also hito one?
Meaning Lama Yeshe's reincarnation you're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Yes, he is said to be a Toku, a
Okay.
reincarnated Lama. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I don't think he uses that title in his name, and I don't know that even in the FPMT that people ever referred to him as like Tukul Oso or anything
Mhm,
like that.
mhm,
We
mhm,
gave him the title of Lama from very young age because he was seen as the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe.
mhm,
But yeah, he is considered a Tukul. Yeah.
mhm. He has given away one of those titles. I think he's referring to be called something else now. I don't remember
Yeah.
what. Yeah.
Yeah, I know he's had a lot of different ways of self-reference throughout his life. I know that he doesn't like the term Rinpoche being used with him, which is
Mhm.
also a title they often give to reincarnate lamas. But they
Oh,
also can give that to people who are even considered that in this life, I believe. But anyway, I don't know so much about some of those titles or all of those titles.
mhm. Thank you. I
I,
was just wondering, yeah, because I never heard him called that. Yeah. Thank you.
yeah, okay.